Hello everyone, I'm meteorologist Charlie Ironmonger. Thank you so much for joining me today for another edition of Charlie Loves Science. Now, of course, today I was going to talk about some discoveries from Stanford University about solid-state batteries, but with snow, potentially ice in the forecast, we got to focus on some winter weather. And of course, this always draws the question, at least from my kids, of why is it going to snow? Why won't it snow? Why is it so difficult to get snow in eastern North Carolina? And a lot of it has to do with geography. Now, initially you may think, okay, well, we're as far south as we are. We may have north in our name, but we are very much a southern state. That certainly has a lot to do with it. However, Virginia can certainly see some snow as well, and they're not too far from us. So what makes it difficult for eastern North Carolinians, again, to see snow come down? And we got to remember, it takes two things in order to get snow. One, you got to have some cold air. Cold air in place is crucial if you want snow in eastern North Carolina. Two, you got to have moisture. You have to have moisture falling over that cold air. Now, that's kind of a dichotomy all in itself, because the colder the air gets, the more dense it is, the less room there is for moisture to make its way into that air mass. So the colder the air is, the drier the air is. But if you need moisture and you add too much, you can raise your air temperatures up above freezing, and that eliminates that snow potential. So it's a very fine line that eastern North Carolina usually has to ride along. And well, I've got kind of a breakdown for you of exactly what makes this such a difficult ask here in the east, at least to get snow in the region. Again, we start out just where we're at as far as latitude goes. We're pretty far south compared to, well, obviously compared to everyone to our north. We're pretty far north compared to everybody to our south. But again, we usually average air temperatures this time of year, overnight lows generally in the low to mid 30s. So our seasonal average is slightly above freezing. That already puts us at a disadvantage. The farther north you go, the colder those average lows are, which makes it easier, again, to get a cold air and moisture combo coming together, even with average conditions. So for us, we have to take our attention not so much over us here in the east. We got to focus on what's going on off to the west. And with that, of course, we run into, well, the mountains. Usually we get all of our weather systems coming in from the west. We live in what at least the specific title of it, it's called the westerlies. This latitude across the United States, we get most of our incoming weather systems from the west. They move eastward. So we have to look to the west, and whenever we're talking about winter weather, usually we get those winter storms coming in from the northwest. That's why we've got those arrows pointed the way they are. But the problem is that, again, we've got the mountains. Now, the mountains may not, again, exactly look like that. I do believe those are the Himalayas. But the point is that there is a topographical change, an elevation change that clouds have to deal with. As clouds move in, they kind of run up against those mountains, and they got to get up over the mountains. In order to do that, they need to become more buoyant. They need to float a little higher. They need to rise in the sky. They need to weigh less. So the best way for a cloud to lose out on its moisture content is to release some of that moisture content, to start raining or precipitating, because that can either come down as rain or snow. So it starts to precipitate on the side of the mountains, the western side, that again usually see a little bit more moisture. Western side of the mountains tend to see more moisture than the eastern side. But as those clouds move over, they lose out on a lot of that moisture content. And then they have to travel over the Piedmont and then down into the coastal plain, reaching us in a much drier fashion. The western half of the state just got all of the moisture. The mountains, the western side of the mountains, just got most of the moisture associated with those clouds. So even though we've got cold air in place, usually as that cold air rolls in, any cloud cover associated with it, by that point it reaches us, is too dry to precipitate eliminating that opportunity for snow. Of course, we also have the water right next to us, the Atlantic Ocean. Water hangs on to heat at a much more efficient rate than the land does. The land can cool off and warm up quite a bit faster than the ocean can. So whenever we get into these months, you have to remember ocean temperatures, surface temperatures, are warmer than ground temperatures. And if you've got a warmer surface of the ocean, the air right above the surface is going to be warmer than the air set up over land. So any sort of ocean influence can easily raise air temperatures above freezing with, a normal system rolling through. So now let's talk about how do we actually make it happen? If it's so difficult, then we do eventually see some snow events here in eastern North Carolina. How do they come about if cold air is so adverse to, again, including moisture within it, at least by the time it reaches eastern North Carolina? With that, you essentially have to have two different systems kind of converging at the same point. First, you got to have cold air present in the east. In this scenario, everything's blue. We've got that cold air in place. Then an area of low pressure needs to provide moisture to eastern North Carolina without adding too much heat along to it. Usually this happens as a low pressure system forms off the coast of Georgia or South Carolina and then moves up and clips the Outer Banks. Now, around that area of low pressure, you do have warm air. So if that low moves too far inland, then it can add more warmth to the air, and that takes us above 32 degrees, and that leads to not so much snowfall, but a sleet or freezing rain or even just a rain event. So it's a very tricky setup in order to get a strictly snowfall event here in eastern North Carolina. We've seen it before. We will see it again. This incoming system this weekend has elements of this to it, but again, it's not a complete replica of this scenario that I'm showing you right now, which is why this weekend we're calling it a wintry mix versus a snow event. Now, here is again a look at a past snow event. Now, the kind of circular lines you're seeing, not really circular, but the lines you're seeing off the coast, those are called isobars, or lines of constant pressure. You'll note that the numbers you're seeing there from Myrtle Beach extending down towards that WITN logo in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, again, those numbers get lower and lower and lower. That is the mapped out version of a low pressure system. And you can see this is from the January 4th, 2018 snowstorm that put down several inches of snow across all of eastern North Carolina, with some seeing upwards around half a foot, even more than that, of snow as that system rolled by. There you can see that low, not exactly close to eastern North Carolina, but close enough to where its rain field did sweep over already frigid and cold air. That's essentially how, again, we have our best opportunities for seeing snow. But I know I've been talking a lot about, all right, snow and sleet and freezing rain. What is the actual difference between all of those wintry precipitation modes? This is a breakdown for it. Usually whenever we got snow, we have freezing air from the bottom of the cloud that the snow falls out of all the way down to the ground. That's essential if you want to see snow. If you've got any point within that air column that is above 32 degrees, then that snowflake, as it falls down, runs into that warmer than 32 degree layer. Usually we refer to that as a warm nose in eastern North Carolina. We've talked about it for years whenever we do forecast snow coming in. Because of our proximity to the Atlantic Ocean, we tend to see a warm nose, or a layer of air in the mid-levels of the atmosphere that is a little bit warmer than the surrounding air, a little bit warmer than 32 degrees. So as those snowflakes move into that warmer than 32 degree air, it melts back to a raindrop. But then it encounters more cold air below 32 degrees as it drops further and further down towards the ground. It refreezes, and this comes out as sleet. Freezing rain, this is what I think we're going to be seeing more of. The cloud cover itself, the bottom of the cloud is above 32 degrees. The air column, as you get lower and lower into the atmosphere, starts to get colder. Finally, ground temperatures at or below freezing will take that warmer than 32-degree raindrop, and once that raindrop hits that sub-freezing surface, it freezes on contact. In this, the freezing rain, at least in my opinion, is the absolute worst of the three. Snow, you can sled in. Sleet, you can sled in it. It's certainly not as fun as snow, but freezing rain is just, it turns everything into an absolute ice cube. And that, unfortunately, is what we are looking at with this incoming system this weekend. So that's a breakdown of exactly how we get snow, the best way we get snow in eastern North Carolina, and a breakdown of, again, how each precipitation mode comes into play whenever we do have these winter weather scenarios approach eastern North Carolina. Now, I do see we've got some questions. Can you talk about the self-limiting aspect of freezing rain? Well, John, that's a great point. As those raindrops fall, you have to remember that those raindrops are above 32 degrees. If they were below 32 degrees, in some instances they are, but we're not going to focus on that right now. We're not going to get into the super cooling of raindrops, but you have a raindrop that we'll say is right at 32 degrees. So it's right on the cusp of freezing. And you've got say a tree branch. My arm, this guy is a tree branch. That raindrop falls, hits that tree branch that is below 32 degrees, and it freezes. Then you've got another raindrop that comes, also 32, maybe 33 degrees. It hits that same raindrop, and then it transfers some of that heat energy that it had, again, slightly above freezing, and that piles on top. But that ice in general gets a little bit warmer. So as you continue to add more and more raindrops that are around 32, 33 degrees onto a sub-freezing surface, it gradually brings the air temperature of that surface up and limits the amount of rain that can freeze onto a particular surface. So, John Moody, hats off to you for knowing about that, but that is essentially the self-limiting aspect of freezing rain. The more freezing raindrops you get onto a sub-freezing surface, the warmer that sub-freezing surface becomes until it becomes above 32 degrees, and then you get that ice to break, it starts to melt, and then all of a sudden, well, you no longer are dealing with a freezing rain scenario. Now, Carol Saber, what does it look like for Western Craven County at this time? Carol, this is I will have that answer coming up at 3 o'clock. For now, though, this is a Charlie Loves Science. I mean, we're just talking about kind of the general idea around snow, sleet, and freezing rain. Of course, we are going to be keeping a close eye on what's to come over the next really several days. Tomorrow is actually going to be a warm day, but we will have your full first alert forecast coming up at 3 o'clock. Until then, I do appreciate all of you again for joining me. And yes, we will post a guide for preparation this coming weekend. Lucinda Nunez, fantastic post there. Thank you so much for that. But yeah, we will be back coming up at 3 o'clock with the latest from weather models. Again, the European continues to show that rain snow line trying to drift a little bit further northward, which would put us again in more of the freezing rain category versus the snowfall category. We'll be going over that in full detail coming up at 3.